Sisu Hub, and Nicola Sowah, who has been doing a lot of work as a speech therapist, and she's also the director of the Spelling to Communicate South Africa. We're having a discussion in studio about autism, the challenges that are faced by parents who are raising children who are living with autism, but also alternatives in terms of education. We do know that in the country there are a lack of resources, as well as a lack of schools that really cater for children who are autistic. So thank you so much once again, Karin as well as Nicola, for coming through tonight. Earlier on, Nicola, you touched on the importance and the program itself called Spelling to Communicate, what it is about, and also being recently introduced in South Africa. Tell us more about that program.
So the important part there, I think, is to presume competence. So we start at a higher level of teaching them, and if they're not able to do that, we would rather bring them down, but they've never shown us that. So it really focuses on helping them coordinate their bodies to be able to communicate. So we assume that they're smart, that they're just trapped in a body that doesn't obey them.
Yeah, and presumed competence is really a phenomenon that's being touched on even internationally. Would you delve deep into that and tell us more about how you then assess whether or not a child is able to learn and comprehend information and connect intent with action?
Well, I believe in the CRPD, which is the convention, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So nothing about us without us. So all the non-speaking autistics that have learned to communicate, they say that this is what works for them, and they say that they're smart. So I believe in listening to autistic people themselves. So I presume that they're smart, and I presume that they're teachable. I rather tell them when they walk through the door, prove to me that you can't learn. I don't assess, you don't need to prove to me that you can learn. I know you can learn.
Yeah, well, it's presuming that a person with this disability has the ability to learn, to think, and to comprehend as well, and to understand. Even if the teacher doesn't see that evidence, how can we, in a sense, compare that to what we currently have with, let's say, a syllabus that is offered in basic education? How different is it really?
It is, well, currently the Sisu Hub was established basically mainly for autistic, non-speaking, minimally speaking students, where we would provide age-appropriate tuition using Spelling to Communicate as a communication method, which means that in the normal environment in our schools currently is that most of these students would do grade 1 functional work up until the age of 18 due to the assessment and the curriculum and things like that. What we do is we give grade level. In other words, if your child is 10, they should be in grade 4, they would be receiving grade 4 information. And I have, in my experience, not met one student that was actually not achieving higher than the grade level, whereas he would have been in a grade 1 level. If that answered the question.
It does. Tell us about the condition in which you find entry-level students in your institution. What are the basic things that you would have to teach them, initially introduce to them?
Well, it depends on the age. You would go from foundation phase where you would start with colors and shapes like any neurotypical child.
Yeah.
In other words, our autistic students should be taught and be exposed to what any neurotypical person should be exposed to. And that is what we are doing at the Sisu Hub.
Sisu Hub, definitely. And Nicola, I mean, people observe autistic children as people who are cognitively impaired, people who can't think for themselves, who are not independent, but you're trying to change that as well. Tell me about the road that led you to that, and how you've been finding it.
So I worked as a speech language therapist since I started my practice in 2010, and I worked with a whole bunch of non-speaking autistics, and they were not progressing well with traditional speech and language therapy. So I started looking even on the internet for non-speaking autistics, or intelligent non-speaking autistics can learn. And that's how I found Elizabeth Bosler, who founded Spelling to Communicate. And after 2 years, with the help of an autistic self-advocate friend and another parent, we brought it here to South Africa. And I only do spelling to communicate now because I believe in rather changing the way I teach to help them learn versus changing the way that they're supposed to learn.
Yeah, tell us about the details of how you go about empowering children or even individuals living with autism. How do you teach them to communicate? Earlier on, you talked about how it was about punching words from a keyboard, for example. What exactly do you do?
That would be the last phases.
Advanced
But
stage.
we have large stencils.
Okay.
And we help them, we prompt them to coordinate their hands. So maybe they want to spell the word cat. So all through this process, I'm teaching them age-appropriate stuff. So if they're 16, I'm doing a lesson maybe on the theory of Pythagoras. And we're spelling out that, I'm not going to use cat as an example because that's too basic. So now we're spelling out Pythagoras. And I'll say, lift your hand, go for the P, get it, reach, poke it with the pencil. Eventually they get to the point where they don't need that prompting. It's like when you're learning to drive. Initially, someone has to tell you, put your left foot on this side, then do this, put your foot on the clutch. Eventually you get to a point where your body just does it and you don't need the support anymore.
Yeah.
So we prompt their motor initially, whilst giving them age-appropriate instruction, and that also leads to regulation. It's like a seesaw.
Yeah.
When their brains are being engaged, their bodies follow.
Talking about traditional therapies now, what is it that we're getting wrong there?
We presume they can't learn. We presume that their bodies are a reflection of what's in their minds. And all of them that have reached the level of open communication, they will say, I'm trapped in a body that does not work. Tell them that I'm smart. I went to the US recently to the hub of spelling to communicate where it was founded, to Elizabeth Fossler, and the first thing they said is, tell South Africa that we can learn, help others like us. So they're smart. So the mistake is that people presume that they cannot learn just because if they say touch red, their body goes and touches the blue.
Yeah.
Whereas someone's actually written a book about this, a non-speaker saying, it's actually not red, it's crimson, but my body just does what it wants. So we're teaching them to coordinate their bodies, and as a result they learn to communicate, and then they have a say over their own lives.
One of the biggest challenges, Karin, is that there are very little institutions, there aren't enough institutions that can cater for individuals and children living with autism. There's around, 2 in Pretoria, 2 in Johannesburg, 1 in Cape Town as well. What's your take on that? Do you think that government is serious about catering for children with special needs?
I think this is going to be difficult for the government, and I think perhaps that the private sector should also get involved in providing institutions like these, because these individuals are actually really very smart and they have very good pattern recognition. They can most probably would be excellent in doing coding. In other words, they can be used in organizations that I think most of us neurotypical people, they're smarter than us actually, most of them. So they could assist the private sector.
But another challenge is that even if more schools were to be provided, the issue is that the curriculum that is used is not conducive for non-speaking individuals.
No. So I think it starts with the presumption that they're smart and the presumption of competence, and listening to them themselves, you know. The Sisu Hub is based on what did the non-speaker say works for them, how did they request to learn. We all deserve access to education, so what do they need?
Yeah.
So even though the government is currently opening up more schools, I don't think there's enough acceptance of how they are and the acceptance that they're smart. And so the education they're receiving, to me, is not education. Imagine someone teaching you for 18 years, this is red, this is blue, touch your nose, touch your mouth, and you know how to do it, your body just doesn't do it, so that's not education to me.
Which is obviously frustrating, and a big part of teaching someone who is autistic is obviously dealing with the episodes and knowing how to go around that, not being able to say what it is that they want to say. That can lead into frustration physically as well. How do you go around that?
Well, to me, communication is the essence of life, so I get them to a point where we help them regulate, but we get them to a point where they can communicate and they can tell us. I have one guy who says, cool the room down to 90 degrees. I feel aggressive when it's hot. Or I can't handle the sound of the vacuum cleaner. Make sure the domestic worker next door isn't using the vacuum cleaner when I come and see you. Simple things like that we would have never thought about.
Yeah.
So it's they're telling us, and we take directives from other non-speakers, not that they're all the same,
Yeah.
but just to guide us in that process.
Karin, what would your advice be to a mother like Sunny Likumende, whose child is autistic and feeling very overwhelmed, not knowing where to go, which school to find, not having the resources or the capital to take care of their child?
I think what is very important for all parents and for actually all of us is to, as Nicola said, presume competence. Treat a child age appropriately, read age appropriate stories, introduce him to age appropriate environments. Do not see him as someone that's intellectually disabled, just monitoring his body movements or his behavior.
Yeah. And yours? What would your advice be?
Well, for me, I feel like something needs to be done, and Spelling to Communicate South Africa is a non-profit organization. So I want the entire South Africa, and the whole of Africa, to have access to this eventually without having to pay for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, presume competence, teach them age-appropriate things, talk to them like I'm talking to you, that's how I communicate with them. But I want this to spread over the entire Africa. They all deserve access, not just awareness, acceptance, change, and access.
Definitely, I think your work represents so much of hope for parents and as well as individuals who are facing autism and not knowing what to do. So thank you so much for your time. We were in conversation there with Karin Dick, who is the founder of Sisu Hub, and Nicola Sowah, who is a speech therapist and director of Spelling to Communicate South Africa. If you are, of course, a parent who is raising a child who is autistic, please do reach out to us at Newsroom 405 on Twitter.